Hey guys, it's Mrs. Beatty. I'm going to be reading chapter 7 in Jack, and this chapter is called Cat. This chapter is called Cat and Mouse and Giant. Here we go. The walls of the giant castle rose above me like endless mountains and cliffs. To my left there was a set of stairs leading to some doors, but each step was twice my height, and frankly I'd had enough climbing for one day. Besides, it was better to enter with stealth and strategy and take the giants who held Papa by surprise. I slid through a crack in the stone, or I slid through a crack in the stone and entered a tunnel, probably for mice and rats. The air was stale and moldy. Only a few shafts of light peered through the other holes in the stone. Above me, there were great wooden beams covered in dust and cobweb and rather elaborate spider webs. Yuck! I leaped back as a giant spider dropped down from one of the beams right above me. Its body was the size of a pumpkin with 8 hairy legs, 2 sharp pincers, and 4 shiny black eyes all fixed on me. I held my axe ready to swing, but the spider didn't attack me. It merely looked at me through curious and then scuttled or it looked at me as though curious and then scuttled back up its silky thread. A mouse as big as a sheep scurried by, twitching his whiskers and sniffing at the ground for food. He crawled up one of the beams, then disappeared through another hole. If a mouse could go through the hole safely, then so could I. I climbed up the beam, pulling myself on giant nails and digging my feet into the knots in the wood. The spider continued its spinning, but I felt its eyes on me. Well, I suppose if you have 8 limbs, it's hilarious to watch little humans climb. As I climbed, I got whiffs of the most heavenly smells: roasted meat and onions, fresh bread, and baked cheese. My stomach growled. The thought of eating something besides beans was almost too much for me. I climbed faster. Finally, I reached the hole the mouse had gone into. It was a tunnel, just big enough to crawl through on my hands and knees. The mouse was crouched behind a sack, nibbling on some grain that was spilling out of a rip at the bottom. He watched me closely with his beady eyes. I must have made him nervous because he quickly finished his meal and scurried off. I scooped up a handful of grain. It was wheat, just regular wheat, not giant. I climbed on top of a sack of grain to get a better view of things. It was undoubtedly a kitchen. There were more giant sacks of grain and baskets of fruit and vegetables. A giant table rose up above me, twice as high as a house. The walls were lined with shelves and pots and pans, rolling pins and dishes and giant wooden spoons. Across the room was a giant fireplace with a black kettle and 2 stone ovens, each with a fire blazing inside. The smells of bread and meat and cheese were so strong I could almost taste them now. But there was no sign of giants. Perhaps I could grab some food without anyone noticing. I hopped down from the sack. The floors were made of giant slats of wood that I'm sure were flat and smooth to the giants. But to me, they had cracks and ridges that were easy to trip over, not to mention giant nails and splinters of wood poking out like daggers and swords. I wasn't afraid. I pulled out my axe just to be prepared. Some hot liquid splashed down at my feet. I jumped back and looked up. Hanging from the sky-high ceiling was an enormous iron chandelier with a dozen blazing candles. I added dripping hot wax to the list of things to watch out for. Suddenly, a bell rang. There was a rumble, and the ground trembled like earth before a stampede. "The king demands his supper," boomed a voice. Through an open doorway to my left came a rush of giants. They stomped and boomed into the kitchen, and I was right in their path. "I need the soup," someone shouted. "Hand me the pie." "Careful now, it's hot." "Woomph! Watch yourself, clumsy." "You watch yourself. I've got the king's pie." I ran back toward the mouse hole, but my path was blocked by something large and furry. My heart gave a sickening jump. It was a giant cat, its fluffy tail swishing back and forth, patiently waiting for a mouse or some tasty morsel to come out of the hole. I slowly backed away, then tripped over one of the slats of wood and fell with a thud. The cat meowed and turned around. It was orange with a squashed face with yellow eyes that narrowed when they saw me. Before I could blink, the cat pounced. Giant claws, curved like daggers, slashed down at me. I ran for my life. Rear! I hurtled over a giant nail and then dodged a giant foot. I ran around the chair and table legs and giant feet and skirts, all with the cat snarling and clawing at my heels. Where to hide? I couldn't run fast enough, and there were no holes in the middle of the floor. I wedged myself between the jugs and jars, but the cat pushed them aside and tipped them over, swiping at me with its giant paws. Out of the way, stupid cat! One of the giants shoved the cat aside, which gave me enough time to scramble on top of one of the sacks and jump in. Ale, yuck! Better than claws, but it was sticky and smelled rancid. Through the hole at the top, I could see the cat attacking the jug. It clawed and swiped at the opening. The jar rocked back and forth, threatening to topple over. Rufus, said a voice. What in the world are you doing, you silly cat? The cat growled and hissed. Did you find a mouse? Did you? The jug was suddenly picked up, causing me to tumble back into sloshing ale. A giant eye came over the opening, and then the jar was tipped. Liquid sloshed over me, and I went down, down, down into a whirlpool of ale. I tumbled out of the opening into a bowl. I coughed and flopped onto my back, unable to move. Good kitty, Rufus. You caught us a big, fat... Oh my, what have we here? The cat snarled and jumped at me again, but the giant scooped me up in the palm of her hand so fast my stomach dropped and flipped, and then we were face to face. Big blue eyes twinkled and an enormous mouth stretched wide to show rows of teeth the size of axe heads. My axe! That I was in the hands of a giant and I had an axe, but there was no time for it. Oh, what a fortune, said the giant woman. I just love little boys. And she dropped me into her apron pocket.